And this is Gabe. Christine and Gabe own Interior Trails. They work in state parks. They subcontract with nonprofits like us. They work directly for private landowners, for public landowners. And you guys have been building trails since 1996? Is that right?
That's right.
I was alive then. Very alive. I've been alive for a long. Yeah, this summer you'll hopefully see them. They will be working on ProPass. Hopefully you can go and visit their crew and say hi and check out the awesome work they did last year, which was a huge upgrade, and the upgrades will continue. I'm gonna let you guys take it away. Gabe and Christina are going to be talking about trail design and user experience. There's a photo of an echidna. It's awesome. Yeah. Ready?
Yes.
Yep. Tell me how to advance.
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's just
Hi,
right.
thanks,
Okay.
everybody. Good to see you. Just so that I know, can you hear me if this is not on? Do it, just.
How about me? Okay.
Okay, for the online and audio, or I mean, recording function, we'll try to use the mic, but it is a little bit hard when you're tag team speaking. So hopefully let us know if we're not loud enough. I don't want people to feel like they're not able to get what we're saying.
The online speaker is also directly in front of you, so it will probably catch you, but.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So if they can't hear mine, I'll give you a wave from the background.
Okay, and then if the person who doesn't have the mic could always speak closer to that one, we'll cover it. Okay, great. Well.
How many people are here because the word joy was in the title of this presentation? Okay, good. We hooked you.
Yeah. After lunch is kind of a hard spot, so we'll try to keep the joy and the fun ratio high, and hopefully some participation. We'll keep it relevant for all of our different conversations. So yeah.
One more quick question for everyone. How many people here are trail builders? Just put your hand up. Okay, most people. How many people are trail designers? Some people. How many people want to be trail designers? That's why you're here. Cool. And how many people are trail users? Okay.
And how many people are trail funders who wonder why they should have to pay for design? Oh, good. Nobody. Awesome. We've come a long way in the last 20 years. Just a really brief background on us, kind of what forms our take on trail design. We came up out of federal service, working for the Park Service and Forest Service for the first third of our trails careers, about 10 years or so. And from that experience, we had a lot of the good stuff that comes with agency trail crews, like a lineage, being apprentices to people who you learn from over sequential seasons, a feeling of being working on behalf of the public good, all of those things that are the best of what the service agencies bring. Then when we moved to the public sector, we tried to figure out how can we make a living in a business while still retaining some of the big picture like values that came from agency work. And then the last 6 years or so running a crew brought another iteration that we're trying to figure out how to be, good bosses and create a culture of safety and give back to the industry in ways that are similar to what we received coming up. So that's all kind of the big picture of our philosophy, blending the best of the professional agency lineage apprentice model with the private sector, the way you can partner in more kind of flexible ways when you have a company that can work with a number of different sectors.
And one of the joys of trail work, I think that most people in the room, to bring that back in, most people in the room, I think, can relate to is we are often referred to as the jacks of all trades and the masters of none. There's a ton of variety from blasting, hand-built trail work, dry stone masonry, mini mechanized equipment operation, layout and design. There's, all kinds of different things that constitute trail work. And over the last, 30 years, Christina and I have been, done quite a few of those different things. And we don't really know year to year, what big project we're going to be on or what we're going to be focused on. But one of the through lines through the interior trails part of our career has been design and layout. We've had a lot of long in kind of complex layout and design projects. And so that's partly what we want to talk about today. This is just a quick overview of the session, and we'll dive right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about the elements of sustainability, just getting everyone on the same page with what we're talking about before we move into more of the user experience aspect. So we'll kind of brainstorm a list and go over some of that. We'll talk more specifically about the fun and joy and user experience aspect of trails, do an overview of the design and layout process. Then we'll get into a conversation about the concept of sustainability on trails and how that's evolved and changed over time in our careers, and talk a little bit about some case studies of projects we've been on recently and open it up to questions. But when you have a question, please speak up or put up your hand. I know after lunch is a tough time to be sitting still, and we're hoping to have a pretty informal and conversational session while also covering some ground. We kind of want to touch on quite a bit of stuff, so we'll just try to keep things moving if we get bogged down in any one subject. Sound good? Okay.
A quick reference to the lineage idea, like we are building with the concepts we're going to talk about, we're building on a lot of different sectors that we've come through, from informal, being shown how to use a clinometer when you're like, 2 years in and you barely know how to do anything, from a crew leader to pretty extensive training we received over the years and mentoring from Mike Shields, to California State Parks Resources, who are one of the big lower 48 agencies that's done a ton to bring up layout and design conversation to a pretty high level. The International Mountain Biking Association's IMBA Trail Solutions Manual, which came out in about 2000 or 2002, I think, or something like that. So those are all stepping stones that are what we're talking about is based on that. It's not like we're, something here is trademarked, but we want to talk about where this stuff has evolved for us in the last, roughly decade or so as we've been putting the concepts to use. So without further ado, how many of you have been in a trails training or intro or something where you've touched on the sustainable trail elements? Anybody? Most people? How many of you can say them in your sleep in order? Okay, good. Then this is not redundant. I always worry every year that people will be like, oh, not that again. But like, it's kind of hard to get us anywhere talking about trails where we don't start with this stuff, because it's really important that everybody has the same baseline. Even if you already know it at the beginning of the season, it can be helpful to remind ourselves. So let's brainstorm.
So we needed to hear from you. What are the 9 elements of sustainability? Okay.
Do not use permanent marker on the whiteboard.
Okay, Ben said integrated water control. And this will be a test of me and Christine to see if we remember which, we have them in order just in our own minds, just so they're a little easier to remember. But, and there are different versions of this. Like Christine said, IMBA has their version. Maybe all of you guys, different companies or agencies have their versions, but the concepts are mostly the same. So there isn't a wrong answer. Don't be embarrassed if you don't phrase it right, or just throw stuff out there. What's another element of sustainable? That was integrated water control. How about another one? Contour curvilinear alignment. Saris? Planned and designed is definitely one. That's in our list, that's number 1.
Yes, there's a bigger concept that's contained within. It's number 3.
Yep, controlled grade. So that the half rule falls under the concept of controlled grade. And we'll once we get the.
It's kind of one of the permanent side of things here.
Once we get the list generated, we'll kind of talk through them briefly just to go through what we mean by these things. But that's helpful. Thanks, Gabe. What else? What's another one? Full bench construction. And so even if you're not 100% sure what full bench is, seems like most people in the room probably are. What about when the trail is on flat ground? What would be an element of trail sustainability that would come into play, particularly in those situations, but also would apply in other situations too? Because you can't do,
Yeah, I heard it.
what? Yeah, durable tread surface, right? So if you're on the flats, if you excavate the organics out, you basically have a wet trench. So you need to put some.
That trench in Alaska? Oh.
Okay, what else? What else? Is everybody awake? What else do we need? You guys are trail builders. What else? What else are you making sure you have? How about that, Vic? We ran our outline, considering the user group. So the meets the needs of the intended user is the way we say it, but and we'll spend some time, quite a bit of time talking about that aspect of trail sustainability in this particular session. Okay, what else? We got 3 more.
Okay. Yeah. That should be right.
What are we not thinking?
I don't want to give it away. What about, how are we gonna, we're just gonna buy these for $2 million and never think about them again, right? And we
Why
like,
did it take us so long to think of that one?
and we typically use the word appropriate level of maintenance. So early on, it was minimal maintenance, which is really not appropriate almost anywhere in Alaska with the level of brush and the wetness and all that. And other people use regular maintenance, but that's also not usually very applicable with the funding being sporadic. So we try to go for what's the word I just used? Appropriate level.
Yeah.
Can't remember if that was 7 or 8. Okay, what else? Do we use? Oh, yeah, here, full bench was it, so I messed up.
Oh, full bench.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, there's a gap. Okay, so there's one more. Because we just did maintenance.
That's good. There's only one more, because I was suddenly like, why can't I think of 2 more?
Yeah, that's what I was.
We're fired.
Two gaps. So this one has to do with like, we're out in the natural world. How do we want it to be? Like, are we looking for like plastic stairs and, yeah.
I'm along the line control points, use of the plaza control points.
Kind of, but I think of it more as more pervasive than that into all the different sectors. It's, yeah, it integrates with the environment. Yeah.
Something that seems like it fits in this particular place. So something that would be part of the like kind of vernacular in one location, like the desert Southwest, maybe would seem out of place here. There are some trail structures that really work in some locations, because that's the kind of, it's made of timber and that's the kind of trees that grow there, you know, whatever, those kinds of things. So does that look like stuff that people can understand and identify with? That's similar to a list that you probably have working in your minds. Okay.
When IMBA originally came out with the list, I believe it was of 6, the first ones. They didn't have planned and designed, and they didn't have integrates into the environment or user experience, and those were added later in conversation about like, hey, yeah, we talk about the users as like the TMO, who is this trail for? But the users also come back in at every sector. What does the user want? What are they going to use? What kind of buy-in do we need to get to have this be worth paying for? People are often paying for trail improvements with bond money, with certain tax pockets, or sometimes not with taxes, with really highly hard to acquire funding that then people are really don't want to misspend it. And so the user needs to be a part of the conversation at every point. And then the integrates into the environment also became part of it, because, you know, we want to be thinking all the time about a trail as it's infrastructure on the one hand, and on the other hand, we often like to refer to it as a trail that interprets the environment. So it's a translator of the place that you're in for the human experience. So the more seamlessly it can do that, you know, you might, something that fits really well in one point, like building cairns with natural rock up on Curry Ridge, would look really out of place in a rainforest where there isn't any rocks. So then you might use, you know, something more like Gabe said, in the vernacular of that place. And those kind of decisions about what's the environment driving, what's the story of the place come into play at a lot of different levels.
So one of the aspects of, when you look at this list, one way to think of it is a checklist. Can I check every box? And I know I have a sustainable trail, fail safe. It's 100% sustainable because I have every box checked. But we all know the reality is there's always compromises. What we discover when we're in the field, this isn't possible, or this isn't easy, or, so what do we do then? What do we do when we find we're missing one or more of these elements of sustainability? What do you guys do?
Two of the elements were we think what's the user looking for? What will the environment withstand?
Yeah, so Mike said, sometimes you can have two of the elements that or more that may be in conflict with each other. So maybe what the intended user wants or the kind of user experience that's desired isn't compatible with some aspect of the terrain or with the frequency of water control that we need to install to make sure that we don't have an erosion problem or something. So what do you guys do? What do you guys as trail builders and designers do? Yeah.
Try to bump up some of the other ones, try to compensate, something out and try to reinforce it by increasing what I'm doing on some other elements.
Great. Yeah. So does everybody hear that? So one way to compensate for a lack of one element of sustainability is to bolster another, or really overemphasize or just emphasize another one. So for example, you can add tread durability if you have you need to exceed your target grade. If I'm going to be going steeper here, I might need to have more integrated water control to shed water better, and I might need to make sure that I'm on durable soil, or if not, I'm augmenting the soil with extra gravel or something like that.
And one of the ways you can tell that these are just instinctively in play, even when you didn't know the rules, it's one of the big ones we've seen in Alaska a lot, is number one, planned and designed, was missed most of the time for about, 200 years. So that one we have mitigated constantly by amplifying durable tread. And that's why most of the not planned and designed trails in the state are covered with plank walk, aggregate material that's hauled in, unrolled chain link fences that are rebar at the corners, like you name it. But durable tread is in constant search of finding the stability that planned and designed did not provide. So that's one of the juggling acts that you can instinctively be like, oh yeah, that's why that's happening. And when you're more aware of the deficiencies, you can plan for that ahead of time. But a lot of the trail building or maintenance in Alaska has been playing catch up to the lack of number one.
One other example I can think of that might be pertinent, and then we'll move on from this, is I'm thinking about a lot of the purpose-built mountain bike trails around, let's just focus on the Anchorage area. There are features that make the user experience really great, and the rideability is really high. And some of them are harder to drain, or they may have a low point at the bottom of a feature that may want to collect water. What do we augment or amplify to try to balance out those features? And this is done really well in this particular community, I think, because we have high quality trail builders, and also we have really engaged user groups, in particularly the biking community, but in lots of other user groups as well. What do we do? Which element do we add? I can't hear you.
Integrated water control, more
drainage
features, and also
There's one other one I was thinking of. Was maintenance, right? So we have volunteer parties, we have work groups, we have a dedicated group of riders that come out and work on the trails and maintain trails, and recognize that if you have designed in and constructed features that may, if they're completely neglected, might suffer, or the sustainability of the trail might suffer, then the regular maintenance becomes an aspect that you're reinforcing, just like reinforcing durable tread in other situations. Does that make sense? Okay, so we need to hear more from you guys. What makes a trail fun? What Which one are you looking for? Anybody, everybody, all trail users, everyone has an idea. What makes trails fun to you? Flow. Okay, that's a great one. That's a huge part of what makes it fun. There's different ways to define flow, right? But everyone understands when they're in it, when they're feeling it, that's one of the things we're looking for on a trail, not just bike trails either. There is a kind of flow you can get. So one aspect of flow that Christina and I like to talk about from a design standpoint is called what we call just kinesthetic variety. So just walking the same aspect, the same direction, the same grade for a really long time gets a little tedious or monotonous. Kinesthetic variety, mountain bike trails have a lot of it because that's kind of the whole point of at least with flow trails, you want, you're up, you're back down, you're off camber, you're, changing directions, your body is moving in space, in a way that's really stimulating. But you can have that on, all kinds of different trails too, not just bike trails. What else makes trails fun?
Intimacy with nature.
Intimacy with nature, right? An experience of a place, a particular place, a really specific place. And there are lots of ways to achieve that on a trail. What else?
Desire.
Yeah, hitting desire points, getting to spectacular features or unique features, overlooks, viewpoints. Sometimes those things come in the shape of, a changing view shed, a changing aspect. All of a sudden, you can hear something you couldn't hear. You can hear the river now. So you have that sense of anticipation of proximity.
I think it's important to note too with
Did I turn it off?
the variety. Am I on? Am I on?
There we
There we
go.
go.
Sorry.
Was yours on?
No, I think I just hit it with my phone.
He hands me the off mic. Yeah. But the variety, it's often, we think about the desire points or the wow factor or whatever on trails as being, these big, dramatic things, but a lot of variety comes from the counterpoint between macro and micro. How many of you have been on a trail where the view shed is epic the whole time and you can almost kind of tune out? Maybe nobody else has that, but working in the Alpine a lot, you can have it where you're like, oh my God, looking at Moss Campion is amazing. Or like seeing an animal print in a really tucked in little off the trail spot just moves your mind and your eye from the macro to the micro. So I never want to get confused into thinking that the wow factors are always big, open, alpine vistas. They're often in counterpoint to whatever the overall understanding of the terrain is, and then providing little ways for the user, the hiker, to interact with the environment in a different way.
Okay, some more. I know you guys, you're all users, so think about what else makes experiences fun on a trail.
Challenge.
Okay, a sense of challenge. Also, in some cases, a sense of progressive challenge or progression, right? Like you're improving. You can be a repeat visitor to a trail and feel like I got better on that trail, or but often a sense of challenge. And I think in the best case scenario, a challenge balanced within a context of safety, predictability, what to expect from this trail, what to expect from this designer or builder. Like, what you're getting yourself into. Sometimes it's through, a particular challenge obstacle right off the bat. If you can't handle that, you don't want to ride this trail or something. But even in, a lot of trails we've been working on in the last number of years are hiking trails, but there's still a sense of challenge, a sense that what we've had land managers ask us for is, can you make this better, but please don't change it. That's what they say to us, right? Well, that's a tough task. But I think sometimes what people are referring to is they don't want their experience sanitized. They don't want all the challenge taken out of it. They want to know, a land manager wants to know they're making good investment in a public asset. And a trail user wants to know that it's going to be fun, it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be always easy. We might have some trail experiences that we want to be easier than others. And that, comes back to kind of what the trail management objective is for that particular trail. What else? What do these photos also make you think of? What makes a trail fun? Dry shoes. Yep, dry shoes are fun. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think, yeah.
Unless you're a off-road vehicle person who lives in the interior, then you don't want to ever be dry. The wetter and muddier it is, but
Yeah.
that's a whole nother conversation.
Well, the thing is that what makes it fun for one person doesn't have to be fun for everyone. But so, yeah, dry shoes. What else? Yeah, in some cases, yeah, accessibility and enjoyment over multiple user groups.
Or like appropriate interactions between multiple.
Yeah.
users.
Yep, yeah, reduced user conflict for sure. I think everybody would agree, that's fun. What about any kind of social aspect to trail use? How many of you guys exclusively hike alone or bike alone? Most of us do, but not exclusively, right? We often enjoy trails of all types with our friends, right? So one of the things that makes the trail fun is an opportunity to be together or to injure your spouse with a boulder or take your kids somewhere.
That the photo on the left is a good example. One of the things that I think that makes a trail fun are unique features that you don't find everywhere. So this is, I mean, big talus and like, glacial erratics are always really cool because the story of how they got there, often in early incongruous place, is pretty amazing. But every once in a while, this is a rock up on the Curry Ridge connector, Curry Sugi connector trail that we came across, where it's right off the trail. There's a little, it's cut up on a little rocky bulge, and the upper person who's pushing can get to it just like 50 feet or less off the trail, and the other one down below. I mean, we've had like everyone who's hiked past there has had to crack up at how funny it can be to stage like the death of the person you're looking at. We had one time where the whole crew is eating below, and the person up there is, So anyway, a lot of trails have a spot like that, like a spot that everybody knows, oh, that certain overlook, or the chutes and ladders section on the Crowpass Trail, or the one spot where you'll always see a moose at a certain time of year, the reliable, like touchstones with what it means to experience the place. And so when we're in the trail design level, we're always looking for what those places might be. And often we'll get to experience them first as a designer, and because we're also users. That's what's so funny about breaking out trail users as a separate category. Like trail builders, trail designers, trail funders are all also trail users in their own time. So it doesn't take that much to not to put on a different hat. You just have to think, I'm a trail designer, but what if I were using it? What would I be drawn to? And so anyway.
And what else? What else? A well-maintained trail. Yep. Things aren't falling apart. It's not in disrepair. Yep. What else comes to mind when you see it, these photos? Something that makes trails fun for people. Access to something else they might want to go do. Yep, for sure. One thing that makes a trail fun, at least for me, is well-built trail, like a high craft level. The stonework on that upper left photo, that's from a company called World Trail in Australia. We got to meet a bunch of their designers and builders at the PTBA conference in Tasmania in December. And man, they are doing some incredible work. I think, there's just some super high craft stone work getting done on some bike trails down there. But well-built trail structures, high craft level stairs, high challenge projects that are really, I think some people, bridges, people love bridges. Some people hike to a bridge just because, man, I love bridges. I wanted to go see that bridge. So sometimes that's what makes a trail fun for people. Yeah, sense of flow we talked about a bit. Oops. I'm not sure what I did. Thank you.
It's the only thing I'm.
Oh, cool.
So just to reiterate then, so under fun, we have a bunch of different ones. The words that stand out to me that I underlined are flow, nature, desire, challenge, features, difference, variety, social, connection, craft, and access. So that's kind of what comes out of thinking, just looking at pictures, all the different values that come from a well-designed trip. Nice job, everybody.
There was a guy at the Boise PTBA conference that was presenting on user experience, and he was talking a bit about what's the story of the trail experience after your day on the trail, or afternoon on the trail, or hour on the trail. What's the story you tell about it? And that helps inform a little bit what we're designing toward. What would be the trail user's last words? Not because they died, hopefully, but because, you know, just if you were doing an exit interview of the trail, what would be their last words? What sticks with them? What's the memorable aspect? And it can be any number of things. All of us might take something different from a trail experience. It could be the, you know, bear tracks we saw, the echidna we saw walking across the trail in Australia, the flowers, the view, the multiple layers of a view, whatever it is. But those aesthetic things or those intangible things that add up to, you know, a great trail experience. What did we miss?
Risk or challenge?
Yeah, a sense of risk or challenge for sure. I think that the sense of progression, the sense of like improving your skills is a huge part of what keeps people. I mean, especially for repeat trail use, people that are coming back to be like, whether it's I hiked it faster this time, or I ran it faster, or I rode it smoother, or I, you know, got more air off the second roller, whatever it is, you know, I think there is a real sense of progression and challenge that people are looking for.
Seasonality.
Seasonality. Yeah.
Oh, having access to a place of different seasons, you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is fun. Get like the single track trails that grow up around the Anchorage Bowl, that places you cannot possibly walk or you wouldn't want to, in all the bogs in the summer. And then in the winter, they're like the highlight of at least 3 or 4 months. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Those sometimes are called ephemeral trail experiences, like ephemeral wildflowers or drainages or whatever. They're there, they're really intense, and then they're gone, and that adds something to the quality of the experience of them. I also just want to chime in on that one. The story of the place, for a lot of people is about, their cultural connection to it. An obvious point of that being lands where indigenous populations have had a relationship with them for millennia, which is all lands really, but, there are a lot of people who use places either in a, like a cultural millennia tradition of like, this was a place we've always done this, a fish camp, you know, a traditional use access place where we were always there with these people, or we were here for this purpose. And those exist in kind of post-colonial as well, you know, places that families have gone, places where you learn how to ride a bike and then you took your kid to ride a bike there. Those kind of lineage and cultural connections are a big part of the story of lands as well. And then another one I think of, how many of you have had some of your more memorable animal encounters on a trail? Yeah. Yeah, for good. I said memorable. Right? But I think that's a really good one to remember. Like, we think sometimes of like the wildlife in Alaska from a planning perspective, we're also often trying to mitigate unexpected interactions. So we talk a lot about sight distance and clearing limits and corridor height and how to avoid sensitive habitat areas, which is all really important. But I think that sometimes we can kind of gloss over the fact that like animals are our neighbors. Like, we're animals, we share these lands. And so trails can be a way of meeting your neighbors and other beings, whether it's footprints or a bird's nest or the first sighting of some animal in a seasonal mode. I think that's, for me, that's really important to remember, whether I'm like seeing a grizzly bear every time or not. A memorable story of a trail is about how and where did I meet another being that I might not have seen if I hadn't been out there that day.
I wanted to quickly mention a couple of these photos, just point out an aspect of trail development that's kind of becoming more common is in the industry. There's a lot of conversation around like replacing kind of defunct extractive resource economies with recreational trail economies. Bentonville, Arkansas is kind of the like big poster child for that in Arkansas. But the town in Tasmania where the PTBA conference was in December is it's an old tin mining town that now is like a global mountain biking destination. Just and they've done an amazing job there. The photo on the right is an old piece of you know, basically a relic of the mining industry that's integrated into one of their dry stone walls on the edge of one of their trails. And then just an example And some of the naming conventions, that upper left photo is just, showing how you can, sometimes the way the trail is named helps tell the story of the place. Sometimes it might be something that reflects a little bit of the founders or the designers, might be Janice's Jive or A-Line or whatever you want, different names of trails sometimes reflect something that's part of the culture of the trail users. And sometimes they might reflect something about the history of the place or historic uses of the place that help kind of deepen the sense of connection to a location instead of just sort of erasing that aspect of a place's history with, a new kind of development. So that was I thought that was just a nice thing to remember as we're talking about trail development in places where we don't have very many trails, or places where there are a lot of trails here, that is another aspect of what makes it fun sometimes, is creating a connection to the community, beyond just the experience of walking the trail.
How many of you have been on trails recently, like say in the last 2 or 3 years, where you've noticed an indigenous place names, monument, sign, something? Only one? Couple? Yeah, quite a few. That's been it's been cool to see that happening in Alaska. I think a bit more so than most places in the lower 48, where land managers and designers and users are thinking about how can we pay more explicit homage to the caretakers and cultures of the lands that we're now sharing for recreation, and not in a like check the list way, but it's very cool how much narrative can be contained in a word, like, or a series of words that you don't stop to think about until you're made to. We all know, like, oh yeah, we're working on Dena'ina lands, or we're working on Otna lands, but how many of us know a Dena'ina or Otna word? Not very many, and except for the public radio greetings of all the hellos, on KFM, or KUAC. But anyway, an example of that, recently in the park up where we are in Denali, the Denali area, they renamed or they named a new trailhead after the Otna word for Riley Creek. Any of you guys packrafted or hiked in the Denali entrance area, Riley Creek? There's a campground there. It's a big, kind of a well-known feature for the entrance area there. And the Otna word for that creek was not Riley, it was Shinestagazna, which when you look at it and you speak English at first, it looks like Tsena, like you can't exactly make sense of it, but the Park Service put a little audio of how to pronounce it on their website. And I think it has a QR code, maybe even on the trailhead sign. And so many people now in the Denali region know how to say Shinestagazna as the trail name, and it means rough rock creek. Which is cool because there's a rock creek in the Denali entrance area, but the other creek, Riley Creek, nobody knows who Riley is. Nobody who lives in Denali has any idea who that was named for. So this just relatively recent introduction of that Otna word has amplified into a very interesting sense of people taking on, not like, I don't want to say that, but like learning how to say it and having that become part of the story of the trail, I think is really pretty meaningful in a way that we can kind of open the conversation around who these lands mean something to beyond just stating it in our like bullet points in our organization acknowledgements or whatever. By the way, I've been practicing how to say that for a while. I didn't.
Okay, so that is just the quick sustainability elements overview and introducing the concept of, user design, the kind of UX, user experience aspect of trail sustainability and trail design. Why don't we spend a couple minutes going through the general design and layout process. This is not a design and layout session, so we don't want to get too bogged down in all the little nitty gritty, but I think it'd be helpful in talking about how to design for the user experience, or to balance that element of sustainability in our designs. Let's talk a little bit about the process of design and layout. So research is the first one, and that's kind of pointing directly to the element of sustainability we talked about, number one, which was what? Planned and designed, right? So the research is basically the first step in the planning and design. And basically it's foregrounding the design process, the layout process always begins with questions, what, where, how, why, all those things. But it's really, the whole process is a series of asking questions, in order to take things off the map and hone in on what kind of experience we're trying to create and what terrain is available for that.
And in a little bit bigger picture way too, when we think about asking questions, layout begins with questions. I mean, it's a lot like any level, any expert. I mean, it's like life really. It begins with questions and crew leadership, running a program, being a grant writer, supporting work. A lot of the people who are working at a level of expertise are starting from a place of questions. I think it's pretty easy to get lured into the idea that expertise means having all the answers. But really, my experience of expertise is much more about being continually willing to revisit questions, figuring out what are the right questions to ask. I'm not wasting my time on the wrong questions, much more so than a kind of wedded sense of like, oh, yeah, I know what to do. Just ask me, I've got 9 answers kind of a feeling. So for me, layout was really made kind of new every time and fun in a really kind of dynamic way when we approach it like that. So sometimes the questions are really technical and small, like why the heck is there Devil's Club here when I don't see any water? Like how can we be on a slope and have like what seems like a perched water table and I just walked into it and I didn't see it on the map? Why is that here? Or why is this section of trail failing when it's like 100 feet long? It doesn't seem any different than anywhere else, but it's totally eroding. Why is that? Stuff like that, very small, technical. And then other times, the head scratching stuff of like, are we in the right side of the valley here? Are we missing something big? Like, you know, is this possible? Is there somebody else we can bring in to help us see this in a different way? And those questions, both at the macro and the micro level, I think are the ones that are most important for trail design, whatever level you're doing at. You know, what we're talking about here, the steps and the amount of times that we toggle back between map recon and field recon on a big, long, complex job might be months doing that. But you also might have a trail reroute that you're doing that's just a couple 100 feet long, and you'll still go through all the basic steps of that, just at a little bit less intense or time intensive way. But you might still have places where you're like, oh man, well, we were talking about putting plank walk here, but what if we did a lateral drain and left it for 2 weeks? We might not need a plank walk. Just little questions that come in, no matter how small the piece of terrain you're working in might be.
So the research is the start of the planned and designed aspect of the sustainability. And then once you've kind of, anymore, we have access to so much information online. There's a lot of research that can be done, reading trip reports. Also, the mapping apps, at least I know Gaia GPS has a public track function that you can turn on. So you can see where the formal managed and maintained trails are and where people go. They're not always the same. So if you are looking to put a new trail in an area like we often are, you can see where people are already going, and maybe you want to stay as far away from there as possible in some cases. Or you might say, oh, well, what are people finding over there? Why are there so many public tracks? Is that in the wintertime? Is that in the summertime? You can start to hone in on a lot of details about a piece of terrain by doing this kind of research. So then, of course, you're looking at like the trail design worksheets, if there is one, a TMO from a land manager that tell you more explicitly in formal language what classification the trail is intended to be, who's the intended user, all of those kinds of things. What are the turn radius? Yeah.
People have heard what's TMO.
It's an acronym that stands for Trail Management Objective. It's a form that a lot of the federal agencies and the state also use, and it's just a way of kind of quantifying a lot of details about specifications for a trail. So it'll tell you, what classification the trail is, so how wide the trail tread should be, what kind of the maximum sustainable grade is, the short pitch maximum for short steep sections, turn radiuses, and appropriate, all of those kinds of things.
Camille, do you have those still? Okay.
Oh, okay.
I just realized, I just handed to Camille a stack of
Yeah.
laminated TMOs. Why didn't I think
Yeah.
of that? But if you haven't, TMO is kind of the like Kleenex word for it. There's lots of types and versions of TMOs, trail management worksheets you might see, or trail planning documents. But how many of you deal with something like that? Either you're making them, you're updating them, you're looking at them, you're sending them out in a contract, whatever. Okay. If you haven't seen a TMO or something similar for the lands that you're working on, it's worth asking whoever you're next person in line who might know that is, even if you don't need it for like going out to log out or clean drains, it can just be kind of an interesting thing. Especially if you have your eye or mind on getting into more of the layout and design stuff, just familiarizing yourself with those documents and the process behind them is kind of a good skill set to have. Also keeping in mind, it's important to keep in mind with TMOs in particular, they're often, you get one and you think like, this is like handed down from Moses with the tablets, kind of like this, thou shalt not disobey. But TMOs are typically much more dynamic. They're more of a living document than they are like a prescription for, in the sense that if you come to a piece of terrain and your person is telling you, we want 6 foot wide, 2-way passing lane, ADA, blah, blah, blah. And you get out there and whatever you find says like, hey, it's not that it isn't doable. We talk about this a lot, but it isn't feasible. So in trails, like almost any like problem in the world, there's some level of ingenuity, engineering, creativity, throwing away your standards, whatever, where you can allow something to get done. But whether it's feasible, which typically comes down to money in our world, is another question. So when we run into feasibility issues with the trail, we can often go back to the TMO and say, okay, well, if we can't have this that you're asking for, but we want to be here, what can we flex with? Maybe we move from 1 lane to 2. Maybe we have to drop the ADA section at a telescope point where we start running into terrain challenges or whatever the case may be. So thinking about the documents like that as being kind of part of the understory of what makes a trail plan work, but not something you have to doggedly beat your head against when the real world is telling you something otherwise. It's important to keep that in mind.
Can I add something really quick?
Yeah.
I find it to be a useful tool to kind of, I don't know, let's say beat up on your managers to show, hey, look, we're not maintaining the trail. It says log out once a year. We haven't been there for 5 years. It says maintain after every storm,
Right.
drainages, and we haven't been there for 6 months.
Right.
So I
That's a
think
good
it's
point.
Something that the field can use to help get inertia.
Yeah, so I'll restate that for the audio. So Vic is saying that TMOs can be used, I'm almost putting words in your mouth, but like a leverage point in a way from the field to the operational side, whether it's the people who are allocating the personnel resources or, hey, we need more funding for this next year, or hey, we're going to lose this asset if we don't keep maintaining it. Because it gives details about, okay, we decided from a planning and design angle that this was possible. We funded it, we built it, and now we're not living up to the agreement we made in the TMO for the future use of the trail. And so that can be used to be like, hey, so-and-so, we haven't logged this trail out in 2 seasons and we're going to lose it. And so then sometimes that can give you a piece of paper that backs what the field crew knows, which sometimes for whatever reason in this world, it's better if you have a piece of paper to show up with and say, this is my request. So yes, TMOs can be flexible on the front end, and then they can be quite durable on the back end to be like, hey, this is what we promised. It's an agreement between the users and the land managers that we're falling short of. Thanks for mentioning that. Hopefully I didn't put words in his mouth.
Use better words.
Okay, so then moving on, we've done the research, we're moving into map recon. We're still asking questions, trying to gain as much information as we can about the terrain. And we move into the critical concept of control points. Somebody mentioned that earlier when we were talking about an element of sustainability. But so what do we mean by control points? It's Christine and I have had a few trail design projects that have been incredibly complex, like the Curry to Kasuki connector is an 18-mile long trail. There were a lot of options. So a lot of people asked us, after that project was wrapping up, they were like, how did you guys figure this route out? Well, it's the classic thing, like, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time, right? So the control points are kind of how you control the size of the bite you're taking. What we're looking for, I know I want to go here. I know I don't want to go here. We're taking things off the map and putting things on the map, right? What are examples of those that you guys can think of? Make sure everybody's awake. Yeah, Jane. Yeah, water crossing or bridge, huge control point, right? You might design the entire rest of your alignment around where you can get across a river, a good ford location or a good bridge location, and they're rarely the same.
Yeah, and a real world example from that, Haley knows that we're working on the early stages, kind of a feasibility line for the long trail, kind of conceptual route from Hatcher Pass to Talkeetna, which is what, like, straight flying by, it's like 90 some miles. So like, yeah, we'll just lay that out. But the number one thing we went to right away was the Cashwitna, which is the main flow that happens between those points. And we're like, there's no point wasting any time getting anywhere until we know where in here we can't or can cross. So sometimes it really is, the control point can take an 80-mile route and make a funnel that's 2 miles long. That helps you take tons of other stuff off the map. Whereas if you didn't start with that, you could have been wandering way down some other creek or like a really cool high ridge route that you could never get to the crossing from. So sometimes with control points, it's also a matter of figuring out which ones kind of have the heaviest step the earliest. Because if you consider something that is more flexible too early, you can get really off. You can put too much resources into something that quickly becomes unfeasible once you put one of the things that should have been first up against it. Mike?
I would make a point that this is the point at which in your design and layout process, but you actually first start finding out that's going to be your roots. It's not just maps. I mean, a lot of what's under your roots should pick up from the map. Stuff you're really exploring. But this is the first time I get to find out what kind of dirt are we standing on.
We're gonna get there. We're not quite to the dirt yet. We're still in the first two map and research and map recon. And then when we get to field recon is where we're gonna get to the dirt.
Yeah.
Yep,
Exactly.
Mike is, as always, Mike is getting somewhere first, so let's just slow him down here. Yeah, so that is a good thing to be clear on though, in case, because there isn't a later state called map that we call map work, where you're taking what you learned on the ground and turning it into a useful map for the next stage. So right now we're still in map recon, which we can do in the winter. This is what's always really great when you figure out when you have a 4-month building season to do all your field work, all your crew work, all your construction, everything, and try to have a regular life. And then you have 8 months where you can't do any of that stuff. Then you're like, okay, what part of the trail design process can we do in the winter? And these 2 steps are a lot of that you can look at. And then now in the 20 years since we've been doing layout in Alaska, what you can see from either like live web-based Google Earth stuff and also imagery from whatever your agency has, from 10-foot contours to LiDAR to whatever, is pretty incredible how much you can learn from your desk. That is not to say I think AI should take over trail building, and it is not to say that that's the most important part, but it is a really a good kind of beginning to the whole thing. I forget, somebody else had a hand up real quick. There were a bunch of hands here. Go ahead.
There's actually two things. Desired viewpoints and sustainable soils.
Okay, desired viewpoints and sustainable soils. So maybe we generally put them under the category of like somewhere between major and minor control points. I mean, in my mind, like the major control points might be creek crossing, river crossing, trailhead, property boundaries, things you absolutely, cannot ignore. But those are very important. Tread soils. How are you at the map level, since that's still where we are right now? How are you finding out some of that information? You haven't walked on the ground yet. You're just looking at the map. So what's giving you clues about tread soil? Okay, vegetation, right? So different, you can toggle through even on satellite imagery, you can look at different times of the year. So you can see where deciduous plants are, you can see, where aspen trees are, which often indicate good gravelly soil, right? So there's all kinds of different parts of the map level work that you can use to determine some of these things.
And if you made a soil overlay map, to go with that.
Yeah, and soil overlay map that can tell you a lot about the subsurface terrain then you kind of know in advance of your field recon kind of what to be looking for and what you might find. Oh yeah, and Mike's saying check the date on the map to see when they're made, because some of them are. Sarah, did you have questions? Yep, wildlife migration paths or seasonal patterns of use for sure. So that's something that sometimes shows up on different map layers. Sometimes there's even just studies done, like, for example, in the Ram Valley area, there have been studies that they know where when calving season or lambing season is for sheep. And so, there are lots of ways to take things off the map or to kind of hone in on where we want to be or where we don't want to be. Yeah, come in. Slope angle, right? That's a huge, huge thing. We want to be, ideally, we want to be on sloping ground, but not too sloping, right? Not too flat, not too steep. You can often see that on the slope angle shading on a lot of different mapping apps. All the different ones that we use have a version of that. Yeah.
We often talk about the Goldilocks terrain that we're in. We just heard Gabe doing it. It's not too flat, it's not too steep. It's just right. It'll be like between 22 and 45%. It's like Goldilocks trail building. What does slope have to do with sustainability? Somebody mentioned the half rule. We call it the third rule in Alaska because half is usually too steep for the amount of saturation and seasonal intensity we have. So does somebody want to break that down real quick for us? What are we talking about when we have slope angle? What does that give us in the sustainability calculation? Well, it has to be steep enough so that 1/3 you can actually get somewhere. You can't have 10% climbing trail on 12% side slope, right? Because the half rule refers to you don't want your climbing grade of your trail to be more than half the side slope that it's crossing. Because what happens when you have a straight line that is steeper, like, so here's our traversing ground and it gets like this, here's the slope. What does that start acting like? Right, picture that only perpendicular lines on a topo map are usually blue, right? So the closer your trail line gets to a perpendicular line, the closer a trail will look to a creek or a drainage. So that's why slope angle matters. It's not just like this sort of, oh, well, yeah, that's a nice feeling for a trailer. It's easier to build or whatever. We want enough sloping ground that you can get ascending or descending tread without flirting with the fall line problem, but not so steep that the construction process becomes onerous because a full bench, which is the trail prism completely excavated on native ground, that the amount of dirt you have to remove to build on a 60% side slope as opposed to a 38% is an order of magnitude larger. So that was a little bit of a side trail, but I'm noticing the time and I think we're going to move into field recon next. So do we want to take a 5-minute bathroom break and then we can return to boots on the ground when we get back? Okay, let's do that. Go.
Memory of your childhood presentation where you just walk to a sustainable trans things with this like, not really walk with people, and I was just like, walking through the spaces like, like thinking, like pieces were kind of like, oh, it's like solid. It was kind of like, oh, basically. No, they gotta do it. They don't know it. They're not telling them answers. Yeah. Also, I mean, if you like, if you have this, then maybe you'll see your field kit or whatever. Right. So we go over. Yeah. Oh, great. It's like, I mean, yeah. And then we started. Yeah. 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 I think I'll get back to that right after. So I think it's.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you have an entire footprint, you don't see. Yeah. You think, no,
I think, yeah, search like stakeholders.
exactly, yeah, exactly. But it's in the terms, what I've found.
We didn't.
That
Thought of it.
files are too big for my honestly, I can't take time and track. So I have to wait to get the saying, it's just like, man, like, this. I do.
Right.
Yeah, it's this one here, I need that. For trail, nothing good in that. You're gonna have to verify.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thanks for mentioning that. I will, that'll be a good segue before we get the field part. Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, exactly, and also it doesn't really have like a connection, to physical experience of the kids. So they're not learning on the computer where you can go free. It's not learning like when you can just a folder. There it is, just a minute. Yeah, so.
Yeah. How you doing there in the front row? Hang it in there? Yeah, they're not ideal. I think they're meant to like have a snack between speed runs, not like sit.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, I know, it's like, what is happening here? I know, yeah, I think some people also just like, they're not field-based people. They're people that, if I could go to someone's computer, I would never have to go into the field. Me, I'm like, I want to do it on the computer to make that time in the field. I want to, I have the real work. It's just, I'm trying to make, especially with these long projects, where you're flying into the helicopter, I think, what do you think? I can wander around the entire summer and I might not, it's like too many questions. Like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Flashlights and huddle up. We're getting ready to get back in chairs.
So.
Before we get back into the next stage of the design layout process with the field recon, which is the part we all love the most and want to talk about the most, I would be remiss not to bring up something that John just brought up to me that we skipped over in the research portion. It's alluded to a little bit with the word stakeholders, which is one thing we use to basically mean like, it can be user groups, it can be landowners, it can be funders, basically anybody who has a stake in the trail area or project. So John mentioned, where does permitting fall into your layers? And permitting is front and center in research. It'll often be one of the first 2 or 3 things we ask. Who owns the land we're on? Who has taken care of the permitting? Are there, private property easement level permits? Are there cultural or historical resource permits? Are there construction permits? Are there migratory bird window permits? Are there Army Corps of Engineers or much travel can use permits? All of the above. And where you come into the layout process will affect which of those you have to check in with. But one of the things we've learned is don't ever take for granted that something that seems like it should have been done is done. We've had it, working in an agency as a crew leader, wage grade 7, and there's a million people ahead of you. And you would think, well, when my crew leader or my foreman tells me to go do this, it's legal. Well, we have had at least 1, if not 2 times in working in Denali National Park where we were asked to do a job that was in flagrant disobedience of a native allotment property without an easement conversation. And we got in some hot water about it. And it was an upper level decision. It was not on the field crew, but guess who got thrown under the bus when stuff went haywire? So it never hurts to ask, even if you're entering in, people who are working for SCA or something, they're showing up on a district and they got the marching orders. Ask somebody, hey, talk to me about the permitting here. Where are we standing? Is there anything I should know about? If the public asks me, is there a permit officer I can refer them to? We also have had pretty big projects be held up because you know, Jane thought, Joe thought, Phil thought, Randy did the permitting and uh-oh, it wasn't done. Somebody left early and they didn't have the proper handoff training, so it was in the upper left-hand drawer, and like pretty big things we're talking about where once a project was on hold for an whole season. So always ask about permitting.
Same thing with H&A too, history and archaeology.
Yeah, that's the permit I was talking about.
And I mean, in my experience, a lot of the permits are pre-construction or construction permits. So at the research level, like pre-design or early design, you're just, when you're looking for feasibility or for an alignment, you don't necessarily know how much ground disturbance am I gonna have, or what kind of an Army Corps permit do I need yet? Because that's really before the construction happens. But knowing that that's part of the process, and you need to be aware of that, even with, like Kristen said, yeah, long lead times or whatever else. There aren't a lot of permits to do that you need before you do the design, but you need to be thinking about the permits that you'll need to do the construction when you're doing the design.
Yeah, because they'll inform choices. If you know that, you know, how we don't have somebody to deal with Army Corps permit anymore, we really want to avoid fill, then you might know what you thought would be a great solution to just this many feet of causeway and we'll be over the hump. That's not on the table. That will lead to a really different design. So even if it's not, like Gabe's saying, you don't need a permit to do the design, you need to know which pieces might affect where a wise or feasible decision might come in.
That'll must be like a social control point.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Actually, boundaries are both visible and so.
So I don't want to get too bogged down in each of these steps because there's a lot more to talk about, but are people pretty clear on what we mean by the control points, and you have a pretty good idea of the positive and negatives, the major minors, that type of stuff, taking things off the map? So that's often how it works, is this kind of subtraction process to say, well, we're not going there, we're not going there. We know we want to go here, we have to start here. And pretty soon the corridor that's available for your alignment gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's this kind of process of elimination. So then once you have a decent sense of, you know, roughly where you think you want the trail to go just from the map, then you're gonna need to get the boots on the ground. So you're heading into the field, and that bottom slide, not sure how, with the reflection and everything, I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but basically that's an example from the Curry to Kasugi connector of the yellow pins were waypoints that we had put in as, this is a rough corridor that we want to explore as a possibility to connect from close to the headwaters of Troublesome Creek to the Kasugi Ridge Trail. We didn't end up using it, but we ended up doing Christina and I did an entire layout, like design recon hitch, exploring that route, and ended up going with you can barely see the line at the bottom of the screen. We ended up aligning the trail somewhere totally different, but that's kind of what we go into the field with. We don't go into the field very often with an exact alignment that we're trying to approve in our minds. We're going to say, I understand as much as I can about this terrain, and now I'm going to go check it out. And then I'm making waypoints, I'm taking photographs. But mostly what I'm doing is looking at the ground, digging pilot holes, looking for these viewpoints, these cool features, these places that are obviously places I don't want to go, like the upper left, right? That's part of the existing trail on the Crow Pass. Surprise, surprise. And how about the lower left? What's that telling me? What do you guys see? Can you guys see those photos okay? Yeah, what do you see in there? Beavers, right? What does that tell me? Yeah, there's water nearby. In this case, where they're chewing is just on a kind of a high bluff next to Eagle River. But what
Changing is, can you go
change, like it's a dynamic area because the beavers are working 24 hours a day to make it different than it is now. So that might not be a place that we want the trail to go.
One of the interesting things about these photos is that all of these are in a spot where we thought we knew something about the terrain from the map, and yet we missed these things. So whether it's that upper one, like you said, is the dotted line where you would walk the Crow Pass Trail. You can't tell from the Crow Pass, the state park map. And now you will be entering a place where the boardwalks are washed out, and for a half a mile, you'll be walking over your extra steps. That doesn't weirdly show up on Google Maps. So similarly to, like I was saying, current activity of beavers does not get picked up by LiDAR. That is something you have to see with your eyes. Same thing with that cool slot there. Those are basically, that's not captured by the, slope angle because they're almost like hybrid bedrock erratic pieces. There's no way you could read your topo and be like, there's a really cool slot that we could bring the trail through until you see it. Same, there are a couple places on the, river valley there where you might be able to project from the map if you understand the terrain pretty well, what you could see. But there are some places where you're at the bend in the river from the Eagle River side where you can see kind of hypothetically where the Eagle River flows under the highway, all the way up to the toe of the glacier that it's melting off of. And that's a pretty cool thing to highlight as far as trail interpreting landscape, but you would never know that from the map. So when people talk about like, oh, with LiDAR, we could get like 95% design before we even go out there. All of this is the stuff that you can't possibly learn from a map. And some of it is the stuff that is most resonant for the users is for us when we're out there, including another big thing that you can't, the sense that you can't get from a computer is sound. The sound of moving water is like an age-old human resonance. Like we have always looked for water to survive, and when we hear it, our senses perk up. There's actually a word for the sounds that are made by the non-living world called geophony. Did you guys know that? I learned that from the book last winter, I think. So cacophony is the like, really noisy sound of like
The ravens.
machines and well, ravens too, but like generally tend to think of it as like the gravel plant, you know, the screaming plant. So biophony is the sound made by the living world, like animals
Bird
and plants, bird song. And then geophony is like rock moving, snow slides, water flowing and things. So being alert to all the kinds of sounds is another thing you can't possibly learn from that.
So once we have done the field recon and we've kind of ground truthed our hypotheses about what's going on the terrain, we know what the soil's like in different places. We have lots of photographs. That upper left is an example of how in a lot of the mapping apps, you can take a photograph that's geolocated. So the white waypoint pins that have the little camera icon, for people who aren't familiar with Gaia, that's what they look like on the map. But basically that tells us wherever one of those is present, that's a place that we took a photo while we were doing our field recon, and then we can click on it and the photo comes up. And so we can take it from both directions or all four directions to see what could we see from there. That partly stimulates in our minds, what was the experience there? What's the story of the trail? What's the story of the trail alignment? What are what we're kind of slowly building a sense of understanding of the terrain. And one of the things that we do, just because we're both kind of storyteller people, we name our waypoints in a way that tells the story. Some people, I know other designers, they just have like 213, 214, and then maybe that works for you. We have the big boulder, the squishy spot, I can hear the creek or whatever, those things. But when you come back to the desk after you've done your first trip in the field, and depending on the scale of the terrain that you're covering, you really do start to, they stimulate your memory for, where was that again? What was that one? Oh, that's where we found that moose femur. Okay, because the pin is called moose femur, whatever. And it brings back the story of it. And that doesn't necessarily get reflected, specifically in your final trail design, but it does help you build a story of the landscape that I think does end up kind of contributing to your sense of how to make a good trail.
You have to be careful what you name things because sometimes you do a trail report that turns into stationing notes for a crew and then they internalize them all and then they name on the map the thing that you named. Like we had that on the Lower Curry Trail. What was it again that they named it? Big Rocky Knob or something like that, where that's just what we had named the point, and then we looked at the map, we're like, Rocky Knob, oh wow, good thing we didn't call it like Puke Rock or something bad, and that's what it's called forever on the map. But yeah, sometimes those things are inherited into the actual story of the place on the map or the naming. But also, like everybody who's been on a trail crew knows, like half of the fun of living in a crew and being in the field is the narrative participation culture that you have about all the things that happened and where and all that. And so it's kind of cool wherever you can build in that sense of I guess just, yeah, the story of it, whether it goes on from you or not, and sometimes it will, so be prepared that that is a really, nice way to, I don't know, replicate the intimacy that comes with really getting to know the train where you call it by its name instead of just whatever the station number is.
So when we're rough corridor flagging, we're going back, we've taken what we've learned, we've gone back to the map, we've refined some stuff, we've tried to hone in on a map line that we think is pretty close to what we want the trail to be. It's still gonna take a lot of walking, like the two photos on the right here, that upper photo is an example of a 1 mile reroute at the perch on the Crow Pass Trail, the Eagle River side. All those colored lines with the waypoints removed are probably about half of the tracks that for how many times Christina and I walked that 1 mile. Like it's still a lot of work, even just for a 1 mile route. I mean, that was pretty complex terrain because there's all kinds of cliff bands and little creeks and stuff, but don't underestimate the amount of time it's going to take you to walk those out to get even just to get a corridor flag line. There's just a lot of complexity in a lot of the terrain that we're in up here.
And I would say too, that a key part, one of the reasons we have a lot of lines is, we're both kind of trend toward the perfectionist end of things. And we often have the sense that like, is this the best it could be? I mean, this is cool, but what if we check over there? Sometimes you have to keep that in check, but it is also helpful, getting back to the point I had at the beginning about trail design begins in questions, to go, we often go out with our first hunch about what's gonna be the best. Let's start by refining that. Then our second hunch about if we run into a big roadblock there, we have another idea, and then some wild card idea that often we don't know what it's gonna be until the end of the day, but we're open to what's the wild card gonna be, or the wild idea is gonna be here. We had one time where I think it was on the perch, somebody who had walked, it was like, oh yeah, that was really cool. That's exactly where I would have put it. And we were like, really? Because that's not exactly where we would have put it. Like it took like 11 tries from the same people to envision what it could be. I think that's just good to remember that there is no one right answer to any parcel of terrain. I mean, in a few places have a pretty narrow band, but in general, the sense of creativity and openness that you bring to it is what ends up for us bringing the most interesting alignments at the end.
And sometimes for us, it's a matter of, inverting what we thought we wanted. Like we might on that perch reroute, we really decided to embrace the cliff bands because man, we tried for a while to fight the cliff bands or to avoid the cliff bands. And then we finally just had one of those kind of what if, what's the wild idea? What's the weird off idea that we haven't been thinking about? Like, what if we go toward them? What if we seek them out because there's durable tread? We know there's rock there and there's a lot of lousy soil in a lot of other places. So, just sometimes the best solution is, just switching your thinking toward saying, maybe the thing that I thought I didn't want is the thing I want. And what if we, made those positive control points instead of negative control points? What would that do to our alignment? And it doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it does.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah. Piggyback.
We did the same thing, on Chicken Lake Cross Park, where, we had beavers and they kept building dams and flooding the trail. And we're like, well, let's kill the beavers. And then Wayne, who some of you might know, he goes, we should embrace the beavers. And so we did, and we built a floating bridge that would float up and the beavers are active and then sink down when they forgot.
Yeah, so for the online people, or if anybody couldn't hear Vic saying that they did the same thing, on Chicken Lake, instead of fighting the beavers and knowing they would lose, they decided to embrace the beavers and build a floating bridge that could just fluctuate with water levels no matter what the beavers did. And so I think that's a really good example of just sometimes the thing you thought you wanted isn't going to be the solution.
Yeah, we talked about that on, I think it was Upper Troublesome where we had similar beaver issues and we were like, oh, what if we causewayed the beaver dam? Like we've already got like a humped thing here. Like what if we just, and then we realized beavers don't really like you to mess with their stuff. We thought this may be a win and it'll be better for you. No, they're not into it. So you also still always have to be aware that sometimes your wild hair idea will not be a good one. Like, that's just part of, you're not going into it knowing, oh, my wild hair idea every time is gonna fix it. Sometimes you have to have the discernment to be like, yeah, that's good to consider, but we're not going with that. But I think it is still important just to remember that the questions are as big a part of it as the answers are.
The very last thing before we move on, I just wanted to throw a couple other slides up, just to give an example of kind of what's possible with digital mapping technology these days, and just to reemphasize that, you know, all of the fancy tools in the world are not a substitute for doing the field work, for actually looking on the ground and seeing what a human being is going to experience. And when we're talking about, I mean, one of the things we are trying to talk about today is how to make a high quality user experience on a sustainable trail. And it's really hard to discern what a user experience will be like in a tangible way from a desk or a map. That said, these images give a sense, like with Google Earth now, with some of the layers you can import, you can get 10-foot contour lines, and that's been what we are relying on exclusively now to get pretty detailed map alignments that save a lot of time on some big remote helicopter fly-in field recon days. Getting a close sense of where we think the trail should go is just a cost-effective way to do it, and that's a tool that we use a lot. The slope angle shading, that lower left is a good example of that, just when it's just kind of turned all the way up to 11 with brightness, just so you can see very obviously where the, you know, yellow, I think, is 21 to 35% or something, and then 35 to, I don't remember what, 50, and then over 50 is blue. So it's like, you know, you're kind of honing in on where's vertical rock, where are cliff bands, where is it cost prohibitively steep to build, or where if we're going to cross some of those bedrock steep slopes, we know it's going to be maybe spectacular, maybe super expensive, maybe requiring blasting like we heard about this morning, whatever, those types of things. So they hone in on some construction choices, some alignment choices. And then the top image is was more of a final product map for the 20-mile project. But the architects we were working with were able to turn some of our tracks from the field and from our map work and put them on to 1-foot contour line LiDAR imagery. So obviously people who know the 20-mile know it's super steep and tons of cliffs, and that's very, very apparent when you see it in that LiDAR imagery. 1-foot contour lines, I think a lot of trail designers are like, oh, it would kill for 1-foot contour lines, but 10-foot contour lines are pretty amazing, and they're a lot easier to work with. So some of you may have either a powerful enough computer to process those big files, which we don't generally, that, you know, the LiDAR files are just massive. And so they're not that helpful for us, except kind of once or twice in a big project where when we have access to them, they can tell you a lot about the terrain, but they're not really like the day-to-day, this is what I'm using when I'm coming in and out of the field all the time.
Another component that I like to remind myself and others of is, even when you're looking at a map, what you can interpret is informed by how well you understand the terrain you're in. Like, I think, I can't remember when it was alluded to this morning, but like the type of rock that happens in South Central as opposed to the interior. You could look at the same slope angles, but know, oh, it's probably going to be blastable in the Chugach, but it might not be in the White Mountains or something like that. Or like when we look at slope angle shading like this with really vertical rock, especially in the blue to black zone, we know that not only is that not buildable, and not even usually buildable with rocky building, like Gabe said, where it's a positive control point, blue and black tends to be out no matter what, because you can't even really traverse it safely. But we know in Alaska that there's a good, I don't know, between 10 and 30 feet at the base of any steep that is also unbuildable, because our toe slope drainage holding is so intense. Whereas in areas with more permeable porous soils, they have drainage much more quickly, and you could be right at the base of the slope all the way. So the map alone, just knowing a slope angle or knowing whatever, you know, steepness doesn't tell you what type of rock is it, how does it drain there, what's the aspect that I can expect to, what do I gain or lose from the aspect in this certain area. So still, the more facility and field experience you have, the more what you read on the map will be useful.
We'll skip past that, and
How are we doing on time? We were thinking we'd go till about maybe another 10 minutes or so and then have a discussion, kind of open questions. Does that sound
Sound good?
sustainable?
Still with us? That's a pretty quick and dirty layout design. We do trainings. We've taught lots with Mike where we actually have an entire field day doing some of that stuff.
Oh, one thing before we move from that, it's a process. It is a process and it's important to keep the steps distinguished. Like Mike would often counsel us early on, when you're in the map recon phase, like you probably don't even bring flagging. I mean, you might want to bring it to be like, oh, helicopter picked us up here. Like, I'd like to be able to see if I can see that spot on the pass from here. But like, don't confuse, field recon with rough corridor flagging. Sorry, I said that wrong. Scratch what I said about map recon. You're at the desk. You definitely don't need flagging. But the field recon phase it's important not to confuse that with the rough corridor and the construction flagging, because you'll hang things way too early. Why do you want it to have your wild hair idea? Now you have to go back and pull all the flags. Like, those are two separate things. And it's a process for that reason, although we do lots of toggling back and forth between, I would say, particularly field recon and map work, where we're taking what we know, ground truthing a line, building a story of it on a map, taking that out, ground truthing it, tweaking the map. So just like the sustainable rules, it's a process that's intended to be thought of in order, but there also are times where you'll refer back and forth between the same two or three a few times, or way more depending on the size of the terrain.
Great. So we wanted to spend a couple minutes just talking about the like trends in the industry, the trailblazing industry, and how the understanding of trail sustainability and user experience has changed over the last couple decades. You know, I think there was a period of time when, well, do you want to talk about the?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, maybe Christine will give a quick history of that.
So I had something interesting happen. I was looking in my files for something else, upcoming orientation stuff, and I found this old file of in 2006, we were working for the Park Service in Denali at that point, and I wrote a grant. I was a crew leader, and I wrote a grant for an internal granting arm of the Park Service called Albright Worth Grant, and they, you know, you send in your, I want to do this, I want to buy this for our program, or I want to do this and that, and with the support of the program director at that point, I wrote a grant for a layout and design training in Denali. At that point, the layout and design that we were doing was pretty rudimentary. Like, we were learning from the foreman who had a clinometer and had one training somewhere else, but there had never been a real like curriculum around how do we think about this stuff. So we through that grant program, and I found the paperwork for this. That was the connection that I was starting with. And I looked back through it, and it was in 2006, and there was a list of like 20 participants, about 5 of us from Denali, and then we opened it up to the rest of the state to have.
I was gonna say, raise your hand if you were at that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah,
You were there, weren't you, Alan? Alan, you were there, right? Were you there?
No.
Well, Mike was?
Eric Clark was there. So Mike team taught with Kevin Meyer, who's a OHV specialist for the Park Service especially. And then 2 guys from California State Parks. They came up and did a week-long training, and Jillian Morrissey was in it. I think Jeff Moore, a bunch of other names too.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Hi, Jeff.
No, Jeff Wolf was there. Jeff, were you there? Kevin Keeler.
Yeah.
Anyway, a bunch of people who are still doing, a lot of us doing trail work still a couple decades out. But it was really interesting to remember at that point, the notion of paying for trail design was almost laughable. Like, if you got brought in, that was right before we made the transition into the private sector, but I believe John Underwood had just started Happy Trails. He was a couple years ahead of us. And at that point, it was like, you know, there's a joke about the contracting world that you just hire Bubba with Bobcat. So like, in low bid, and like, oh yeah, there's so-and-so, and he's just got a Bobcat, so he's gonna put in for it. And we would refer to it as like Charlie with the clinometer. Like, anybody thought they could do it. They're just like, oh yeah, we'll just throw in some flags before we build it. And it was this really lowball sense that design was pretty kind of peripheral to the building was what you really wanted. And, oh, we can't wait to have this cool trail here. And to think about how different it is now, 20 years later, where there are entire contracts that are put out just for a feasibility study. And it's not, I don't think it's so much like, some people focus on the like, well, it's all planning and it's no fun. There's never any building anymore. There's some awesome building happening, a lot of funding for a lot of cool trails, a lot of excitement around the quality of the trail builds that are happening. And I mean, yeah, they're more expensive, but they're way better. And I think that's been really cool to see the investment in, like, you feel really old when you're like, oh, back in my day, like, but 20 years to see how far the design and construct or design and layout process, having been elevated to a real craft, has ended up with so many more varieties of exceptional trails in the state, and the promise of more of them being funded all the time. Yes.
General public is kind of buying in the fact that working on trails is actually a profession.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's not just a hobby.
Right,
Yeah.
Mike's saying that has also coincided with the general public being aware more and more so that a trail, career in trails, trail building, trail design, trail advocacy is it's a real job. It's not just something you do for kind of a lark after your gap year or something. So that's been cool. And I think that has been, like, the more the craft becomes evident and the more the time spent shows up in the quality of products, you know, for a long time in building trades, like, everybody knows that architecture, design, whatever, will be 10% of the build of a structure, probably more so in some cases. So why did it take us so long to figure out that we're doing major earth moving and we're changing all kinds of patterns and devegetating this and that? Like, why aren't we thinking about that as a proportion of the project overall? So,
Because trails is supposed to be cheap.
right, yeah, trails is supposed to be the cheap place. But anyway, that's just a little background on the 2 decades, and I would say, yeah, well, we can leave it at that for now. We can have more conversation after if that's of interest. Next one.
sure. So then moving from that training in 2006 and kind of a lot of Alaskans getting, kind of learning the rules, for lack of a better word, of trail layout and design and sustainability. I think there was a period of time statewide where a lot of the trail designers were new to the field and were really focused on following the rules, internalizing the steps, doing it the right way. And I think one of the ways that like we in the industry got buy-in from land managers and funders was building on the concept of, this is a new way to design trails. You're going to have to spend a little more to get the design done, but it's going to be sustainable and it won't need, you know, a lot of maintenance because it's going to be designed sustainably. And I think, you know, now that's one aspect. I think we've realized now, 20 years later, that there's no such thing as no maintenance. And that isn't really a selling point for land managers, because I think it's a little bit of a bait and switch that, like, if you don't take care of it, it will fall apart no matter how well designed and built it was. And the other aspect I think that's started to shift a little bit is that there was a real emphasis on, like, the integrity of the terrain and focusing on that true trail sustainability didn't compromise the native hydrology of the landform, or you know, followed some of these specific terrain-based rules. But in some cases, the trails that resulted from those kinds of designs were not meeting the needs of the intended user. And so one evidence of that is that the trail people don't stay on the trail. There's a lot of user-created trails that diverge from the trail that was designed and built. So those are places of friction or of discontentment or whatever you want to call in the experience of the user. So now I think we're arriving at a place when we're recognizing now, and if you think back to the list that we generated together of the elements of sustainability, that last one, even 6 years ago when Christine and I taught a layout and design training with Mike in Reno, Nevada, that wasn't on our list. So that has been a mindset shift for us as trail designers toward not prioritizing over the other elements, but giving equal weight to the experience of the user. If we're not meeting the needs of the intended user, and of course, there is a distinction between the intended user and the unintended user. The unintended users might not be satisfied with a great trail that we designed or built. But if we know the intended user and we're using at least a little bit of foresight to imagine who might want to use it after it's built, so the unintended user, we're gonna get a better or a more truly sustainable product that's easier to maintain if that is kind of part of the conversation right from the ground up.
And I would add, just to amplify a little bit what you were saying, Gabe, about early on, it was appealing to land managers we were trying to get, but to understand why it was worth investing in. It can be really convincing to have data and lists to bring them and say, this is why you should invest in this. And I think that's why when I think IMBA's Trail Solutions, I think mentioned came out, the first 6 of theirs came out in like 2004 or so. So that in 2006, we were kind of there with our IMBA manual and our listing. You're saying, hey guys, please, 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 will you pay for this? Here's the science. The half rule and the 50% matches this, and the no greater than 8 for 100 feet, and then a greater versus of 2%, and the outslope is 3%, and boom. Don't you want to fund that? It's a lot easier to get buy-in for that than like, trust me, there's going to be fun. Can you invest in joy? Like that just doesn't, that's not what turns the ship. So I think there was a little while where we needed to bank more heavily on the data, on the replicable products in order to get the industry and the funders to realize this is based on something. It's not just smoke and mirrors. And then once we have the culture of this is worth investing in, we can start putting more of the craft and fun up front so that we don't lose sight of why we're out there to begin with, which is not to save money or have our name on something or whatever. It's to provide ways for us to be outside in the worlds that we are a part of in a way that can last forever. So.
And I think, to be totally honest, I think when I was like early on for me after that training, there was a little bit of arrogance where I was like, okay, I understand. I've seen the light. Like, I know better. I'm going to put the right trail on the ground and the users will, they're going to learn to love it, kind of a thing. Well, obviously that isn't true. That doesn't happen. And one of the concepts that one of our colleagues in the PTBA from Quebec mentioned it a few weeks ago was bringing empathy to the design process. And his focus is kind of the UX is the kind of acronym, but the user experience. And so, the way I think about that is imagining what the trail user or a trail user who is not me wants to experience. I might design the trail that's perfect for me. This is exactly how I like it, but that's not really what my job is. And so bringing that sense of imagination to what would a different trail user who isn't me want to experience here. Sometimes that is a key to kind of overcoming that sense of superiority, and also like heading off the possibility of lots of switchback cutting and social trail formation on the trail that you just finished, because you can actually think, well, let's see, if I were here and I wasn't the guy who just flagged this route, maybe I would go straight here, or I would, want to go straight up, or, whatever, just some other aspect of it. And I think, that's designing to meet the needs of the user and kind of being true to the terrain is a little bit easier with single-use trails. So as far as single-use trails, the user is very specific, and the type of experience that you want isn't uniform across the board. Obviously, different riders want a different riding experience, different hikers want a different hiking experience, but we have a bigger challenge in front of us, I think, designing multi-use trails or shared use trails. And that's probably a whole other session we could spin off on. But I think single use and bike optimized trails have definitely helped refocus the fun factor on trail users, recognizing that in addition to getting a good workout and getting to a good overlook, that sometimes people are just coming out to just have a little fun or a little joy or a little smile on their face, and that all of those things are possible in any of these projects that we're doing, but we have to be thinking about it ahead of time or as part of the process.
And that means getting back to the empathy question, realizing, like you said, that even within user types, there is a huge range of different experiences that could be possible, and kind of going into it knowing that all of them are equal in some ways, that like a downhill bomber mountain biker is not superior to a person recovering from surgery who's just going for their first cruise on a bike in a year, or, a Marine Corps hill running course for max fitness with a 15 beats per minute resting pulse is not superior to someone who's their fun means hearing the first songboards coming back with a sprint. So I think the empathy part for me is not making a hierarchy of users. And of course, you're building a downhill mountain bike trail, you're not designing for a birder, of course, those are incompatible uses. But thinking about how the different levels of experience will find the point of joy or connection within any given alignment, I think keeps it likely to end up being the most accessible possible, and also prevents us from replicating boring trails. Because like if you're using a template where you're assuming the same basic things you hit are going to be fun for everybody, then all the trails are the same, and who wants that? Whereas knowing that there are different users that will drive different outcomes means that you could hike on 10 different trails and have them all feel really unique and responding to the place. That's what I'm after.
I wanted to quick touch on, before we get some like discussion time, I wanted to quick touch on a couple of things that were interesting with the new technology. The photo on the right there is one interesting thing we saw in Tasmania in the bike park that was adjacent to the kind of destination biking town in Derby. They basically have like a shuttle buses that take people to the top of, mostly people are riding these trails single direction downhill, and well, they're single direction trails, but then there's one up track trail on the whole system that you can ride up if you want. And in the last couple of years, as e-bikes got more and more popular, it was like under 5%. They call it the twisties, and it's just a series of for a while of just a trail that's slowly ascending, but it's totally rideable. You can ride the whole thing, pedal the whole thing, and but the e-bikes were cutting all the turns because they don't need a trail that flat to ascend. And so what they started doing was, it's hard to see with the shadows, but they started rock armoring all the corners. So there's a straight line option for e-bikes. And that isn't some revolutionary concept or anything. I'm sure lots of you guys have seen or done that, but I think that's one of the things, either making trail designs that are adaptable from the start, or adapting our designs to suit or fit new developments, new technology, new users. Instead of hating the new users, we just figure out, okay, how do we meet their needs? Is there a compatible use here that we can, is there some aspect of our existing tread durability, or an element of sustainability we can really emphasize to meet the needs of this new user, e-bike user. And I think one of the other prominent things that we need to look toward adapting our designs around is just the proliferation of like the Instagram post, like, this is where I went. And so everyone wants to go there. Where was that? How did you get there? And the volume of use on certain places or certain trails or off trail to certain overlooks are, that's something I think we need to be, as a trail building community, we need to be aware of. Just that is a different pressure and a different kind of use than we've really seen. I know that's nothing new either, but it's now starting to affect landscapes and use patterns. And when you look on public tracks or heat maps or different things where you can see where people are going, it becomes really clear.
And a lot of that happened post-COVID, when there was this strange blend of people being online way too much. So they're communicating and planning and everything they're going to do. And also they want to be doing anything outside their houses so much that once they're allowed to, we all just sort of flooded the world. And there are a lot of studies about the positive mental health, but negative also downsides of impact to public spaces, and also friction between people who are all pent up and then overused areas. So I do think that had kind of a peak, but it probably is not going to ever totally level off. So yeah, designing for that for sure.
Should we?
Yeah.
So how about do people have questions or comments or other things you want to discuss, or thoughts on what we've already talked about? It's kind of a lot to encapsulate, even though we had a decent length of a session, but There's lots more that we can talk about, but yeah, Will.
Got those, 9 rules public, where,
What's that?
you got those 9 rules public?
I mean, they're pretty much, they're just slightly edited from the original IMBO rules are basically contoured curlinear. They originally called this the half rule, and later we decided to call it controlled grade. I think others did too, because controlled grade gets not only, I think the original IMBO rule said 10% or less for this much. And then we realized, okay, controlled grade means I'm controlling the grade. I'm not responding, oh crap, I didn't see that. Now we gotta go 25%. Oh, I didn't think about that. Now I'm going, controlled was more, less than a number itself. It was more the big picture of how are we thinking about it. But so these 6 were in the original IMBA. And then plan and design came in through a number of different arenas. It's like, we didn't invent this. That's what I was trying to say at the beginning. But this is on our website, this list. But a lot of people we started using integrates into the environment teaching in the lower 48 when I think a couple other people hadn't been using that as explicitly. We're like, oh yeah, that's what we should call it, But I would say this is kind of a collective industry thinking more than like I made all these up by for sure. But the user experience one, I think we're seeing pretty universally coming as more of a hard and fast one. Like the Professional Trail Builders Association that we are members of has how many members now? 300 member companies across the world and on every continent pretty much. And it's interesting to see how the user experience is really one of the uniting factors wherever you're from that people want to talk about when we get together. So I think that's kind of the evolution of that. A 4-6 and then us adding around the edges some of the bigger picture philosophies that we want to permeate the design rules.
And we have used that list as we've used that list as an assessment tool. For sure, it's not foolproof, but if you are in a position where you're doing trail assessment, if you're wondering what's failing on a trail, this is a great starting point. Just, go through that list and be like, which of these elements is missing? Which 5 of these elements are missing on some of our trails? It doesn't give you everything, but it is a good starting point. Just getting people, it helps explain to new employees or new crew members, new land managers, just like, what are we going for? And why are we doing it the way we're doing it?
The depressing part is that with a lot of trails that were never like inherent social trails or whatever, like, because one of the we haven't touched on this stuff, I don't think overtly yet, but one of the sustainability definitions is a trail that can bear its intended level of use over time. So like a sustainable trail for a family's fish camp might be a fall line shot down to the creek that 8 people a year use for 2 months. That's sustainable for that level of use. Whereas a lot of the trails we thought were sustainable post-COVID, they got inundated in like a wet month and they don't seem that sustainable anymore. That was a rise in the intensity of use that wasn't planned for. So anyway, there are places you can go where the answer to all of these is no, which is really depressing. Was it planned? No. Is it contouring? No. Is it controlled grade? No. So then when you have 9 no's, then you're just like, what do? You still have to work on it. So
Yeah, we did it.
You figure out what to attend to first. What can I prioritize? If I can't go backwards in the planning, so we put it all in on durable treaded maintenance, and then maybe we can have time to put in integrated water control next year. It does help you figure out with the juggling act, what are the most likely to produce a good result.
Yeah, well, and I think too, that kind of a huge thing that Alaska grapples with is that a winter trail is not a summer trail. And sometimes they can be both, but many times they cannot. And, if you deal with all the frozen lands and everything else, all the swamps, that's like a major stumbling block for trail. They're like, oh, why can't I go there in the summer?
Yeah, Vic's making the point that one of the big challenges in Alaska is that the winter trails are not summer trails. And I think especially as our winters are getting shorter or a little bit less predictably cold, we're having even more tension around that issue. And a lot of our inherited alignments were winter trails. I mean, the Iditarod National Historic Trail, the Crow Bass Trail is a great example of that. I mean, that was when it was a dog sled route, they were not going through the chutes and ladders section on the cliffside, they're using the river. So yeah, there's tons of examples all over the state. I think particularly in the interior, but all over the place where it was a winter route. And then people started using it in the summertime and boy, it got muddy in a hurry and, yeah, so then do you realign? Do you improve? Yeah, there's a lot of challenges. What else? Yeah.
Talk about maybe to abandon, plan, design, trail. Even on sort of alternative. When they're like, cut off sort of trail, when to stop.
Okay, so yeah, so he's asking, when to, abandon a social trail or when to, if you see a social trail forming, when to kind of adopt it as maybe this is where we want to build a better trail or when do we want to try to close it off and keep people out of it? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, okay. I mean, that's a tricky one. Some of it depends on whose land it's on. Some of it depends on who's using it. I mean, I don't know, do you have that's really complicated because sometimes where people are going, turns out like, yeah, they're not going to stop. That's a great spot. Why don't we harden it or realign it slightly to get to that same destination? And other times it's, you know, like we've been working on a Denali Borough trails and recreation plan for kind of master plan for the borough. And there are some places where there are pretty prominent social trails and the people who use them are like, if you guys are trying to make a master plan and you include my like private trail, it's on public land, but my private trail in your trail plan, I'm gonna shoot someone. You know, they get really upset about it. It's like the place they've always gone and nobody, you know, secret spot syndrome where like no one knows where it is. So yeah, I don't know.
Part of my mind goes to when you ask the question, like, what are the options? So there are three main options. One is you use it and incorporate it fully. Two is you abandon it, or three is you keep it open as an alternative to what you build. So I think that's just important to assess each of those and how it fits in with the management plan and with the intensity of users. Oftentimes, we don't have great luck telling people, stop using this, start using this ahead of time, but if you design a better trail, 95% of people will start using that. And the 5% who stick to the old one, I mean, the numbers vary, it depends on where you are. If the further you get, I guess, from, yeah, whatever, we won't get into that. We don't want to polarize certain regions or users, but there are some where that's flipped. And the whole part of the identity is that we're not doing what you tell us, like shoot the signs kind of thing. So we're not talking about that, but in general, yeah.
Oppositional defiance as a population quality.
Yeah, but I would say, there are times where leaving the old one open is completely viable. That we might take by taking with the whole metric of something becomes unsustainable if there's too much use for what it can bear. If we can siphon off even half the users to make something more sustainable, you're splitting them between two alignments, or people have an option when the season of use is intense, so you get less degrading, like braided trails going up to a pass or something. You can have good luck leaving one open and it's just the intensity of its use diminishes. I would say in general, I don't try to incorporate a social trail into my design just by the fact that it's there, because the thinking about why it's there is really not usually a forethought. It's just the path of least resistance, or it's a game trail that turned into one or whatever. So don't orient your design around it. But if you can get a trail close to it that doesn't incorporate it fully, it will fall out of use once you're going generally where they want to go, but in a little better spot. It tends to kind of fall out of use better than having to close it off and then fight against users who are trying to open it up. We've wasted a lot of time telling people, oh, we'll lay out this new one for you, and then this one will disappear, and then you'll have, you know, it doesn't usually work that way.
Quick, we're a little after three, I'll listen to you talk as long as you're willing to talk, but if folks do need to boogie or if folks online, just so that you know, I just want to let you guys know where.
Okay.
Okay, but if folks want to keep discussing, we have Gabe and Christine standing up there, so.
For some reason, I thought we had till 3:15. Sorry.
We do.
No, we do. Oh, okay.
Did you say 3:50?
I think but.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was not time managing very well. I thought we had 5 more minutes, but,
Alan has.
other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Alan.
I was just gonna say something about the social trails. I just look at, are they negatively impacting our actual trail? And if they're not, then I'm more apt to just kind of like, well, you guys be over there, be over here. But if it's like tying into ours and it's like, fall line coming down and then putting
Yeah.
debris deposit, then I'm more likely to try to, change that, fix that, close that unsuccessfully usually, but,
Yeah.
make attempts, but I think that's one of the ways I can look at it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if it's negatively affecting the trails you're maintaining, you may do something different. And I think, I mean, what Christine was saying is, seems right to me, like figuring out what need is it meeting? What need is not being met by the existing trail system? So why is this social trail being created? Is there a way to meet that need within your existing trail system? Or, it does indicate that there's a user or users that want something that they're not getting in the rest of the trail system. And maybe that's just a place of their own, or a feeling of everybody loves to be the guerrilla pioneer, oh yeah, this is my trail, but I'm not sure.
I think it does also bring up just the idea from an ethical standpoint about us being on lands. It's like, I don't necessarily, we have desired experiences, but I think we should probably not like double down on the idea that we all have to have whatever we want all the time. Like part of me just checking in with my own designs and what I want as a user is be like, okay, and how can that be balanced with what's good for the visual view shed for the city that's looking at Mount Baldy or Flat Top? What's good for the other creatures that rely on these lands? I don't know, sometimes it's just good to leave places alone. Even though I love to do X, it doesn't mean I should be able to do X everywhere I want to. I feel pretty strongly about that. Like I can be a mountain biker and still wholly defend places without bikes for people to use and enjoy in different ways. So I don't ever like to get pulled into the idea that any instinct we have needs to automatically be met, even though I know we're not ever gonna culturally get to the point where we're like, no, I'm good without that. My needs don't have to come first. Like that's not gonna happen like globally, but it's still good to check in with that when we can on whatever level we have the ability to impact.
Yeah, there's kind of a lot of clients that you were relationship with clients that look like you're like, we can build it. They're like, hey, we want this to go here, and these very specific criteria, see them, they're like, you know what? They go over this, that's something. We go through all the lists and like, everybody stacks against it, or unless you got $1 million, but here's.
Yeah, we have had that. Yeah. We had that, yeah, we had it once with a client that, we get approached pretty regularly by organizations that have, we already did the trail design. Could you guys build it for us? And we're kind of at a point now where, our design reputation is really important to us. And so, we at least want to see the design before we would sign on to build it. And usually we would want to have some contractual flexibility to adjust the design to make it as good as we think it can possibly be. So we've had a couple clients that approached us about, can you build this flag line? And we went and did a site visit and we're like, I don't think it's a great design, but here are ways you could change it. And it turned out, the permitting was already done. They didn't feel like it was particularly feasible to change it in the way that we wanted it changed. And so we were like, it isn't worth it. I mean, for our particular business, it's not worth it to our reputation to build a trail that isn't a good design. So, yeah, I mean, and that's not, that would change for different businesses, depending on what the project is, but for us, yeah, that we have had that quite a few times where like, I don't want to necessarily build something that somebody else designed, or unless I can sign off on the design being up to the standards that I would want it to be. But, yeah, and sometimes a land manager or a landowner might be totally open to that. Like, oh, okay, well, this is just our first try, make it better, and then great. And other times there's some kind of, restriction.
I guess I'll just say it. Finally, there's something construction background. So for me, construction, it's always 39%. Yeah. So you got your 30% design, architectural design, might have some truth on, okay, this architectural design feasible. I don't know architects much that day, or 60% are actually like this on the ground, student paper.
Yeah.
The details, kind of.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So to restate that for the audio, someone from the construction background who's mentioning that it's very common in a lot of other design arenas to work with 30, 60, and 90% to 100% design, where you have an iterative process where you're building certain level and then you get a pretty high level and then you get a little more detail and you get a lot more detail and then you have the plans that you hand over. And I would say the Forest Service is probably the best at that process of the clients we've had. They have a process for that already internally. They're very used to it in lots of other arenas. And the 20-mile project we just finished was basically 35% design, where we spent, a couple weeks in the field working on a previous feasibility study with 3 options, and in which we got a little clearer about which one we recommended and how much really big order of magnitude costs and so on. And then that will move forward to probably a 75%. But yeah, that is starting to happen more. And I think even when it's not articulated as that in the contracting documents, it's still something to aim for, where we'll often get approached by, even like a project like Camille early on, for what they were doing in Cottonwood. And we were like, okay, let's slow down before you start building. Let's think about a mini master plan. What is this whole site going to look like before you start approving a certain flag line? So even when we're not calling it a separate step, the more we can bring that discussion in along the way, I think it makes for a better end result for both paying for it standpoint and also that it's going to be really good once you get it on the ground. Thanks for bringing that up.
I think we're definitely saying, like, we didn't used to pay for trails. We were like, oh, just go build a trail, right? And now we're like, I think we were all agreeing that we could pay for trails. And then, like, at least from my perspective, because I do a lot of funding and asking for money for trails, is like, we've all agreed, we're gonna pay for trails. And maybe we're gonna pay for maintenance, but probably we also think that's great. But we're like, still kind of split on if we can design or not with the money,
Yeah.
So like, with like bonding in the municipality, when they bond for roads, they almost always bond for design. In one set of a bonding package, and then the next bonding package, they bond for construction. Like they know they can split that. And we're actually trying to start doing that for some like rec related projects, but the like acceptance of that, where you have to like fund a rec project twice, you have to fund the design, convince people it's good to fund the design, and then the next time they have to vote again or approve again the same project, they're like, we did that last time.
Yeah.
And we're like,
Yeah.
what do you think $60,000 got you?
Yeah.
Right.
So like, I think there's still some like public advocacy work around convincing people that good designs are a good investment.
Yes.
But it's like,
Yeah.
big there.
That's a good point that Haley's making from the funding side, that it's still, even though we're more on board with funding trails, we often think about that as funding trail building, and there's still not necessarily the appetite in the public that there could be for understanding how much of that is going to be in design. And so I think, if we saw the progress I just mentioned in the last 20 years, like maybe 20 more years from now, when Lord willing, I'm not the one who's running the excavator or the chainsaw anymore, maybe not. How old am I? Yeah, probably not. But anyway, that same type of building on that will be happening. But I think you're right. And like many of us who do design builds know, like the worst project you can get is when you have to put in a low bid for what's functionally a design build, but isn't being called that. Because you don't know the design yet. You don't know the per foot cost. You don't know the upper end is going to be this much, but I'm going to have to travel over this much to do it because you don't know how that's laid out yet. And then you end up padding a bid to make up for contingencies that you might not even have. So we found with a lot of clients that it's a lot cheaper, even though it's not cheap, for us to do a design and then build from that, where we're not having to add contingency. We're building more to almost like a time and materials with a not to exceed model, not to get too like technical, but that can provide a lot better value than what's been consistently thought, like, oh, low bid. It's like, well, sometimes a low bid gets you a low end because you can't do what they want for what you were asked to do it for to get it the job. So I think all of that conversation will help. The more people see something that they funded through whatever initiative turned into something that they love, the more they will be willing to replicate that process in the future, I hope.
And I think that's my background. Haley said is that I think there's a huge educational component, and it's incumbent on all of us as managers, trail users, builders, or whatever, that the public needs to be educated on stuff. And you'll be out there and you'll be working on the Gold Court Trail or whatever. People will be cutting through this. I mean, they'll just be tearing up the work that you just went through it. And, just like, don't lose your marbles on them. Take that as an educational moment. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Explain to them. I mean, and I know there's things that make me crazy. Cause I get that, but take that as an educational moment, you know, to help explain these things to people, you know, drainage, whatever, wildlife, wherever that trail is in that particular spot. All have your trails, but I think that's a huge component, and we can't just do it with like giving people fines and banning them and, you know, yelling at them.
Yeah.
We gotta, you know, make it part of the solution.
Yeah, and I think that, well, just to restate, so Vic is making the point that it's incumbent on all of us to do the mini education about why we're doing things the way we are, whether it's in the public process meetings that Haley's often, you know, running, or somebody runs into you on the trail and you're like, hey, you know, you might not have thought of this, but this is what we're doing because of water, and that'll make it less brushy, and then like, oh. And it gets back to the idea of the empathetic lens, to like put yourself in their shoes. Like, sometimes you put yourself in someone's shoes and you're like, yeah, they're just gonna be a jerk. They're not interested in knowing more, connecting, and you gotta let that go. Like you said, Vic's main advice was, what, how did you put it? Don't
Lose your marbles.
Yeah, that's a good one for
Words
life
to
in
live
general.
by, Vic.
But aside from the real outliers, a lot of people, I think, if we put ourselves in their shoes, just didn't understand what was happening or didn't think about it that way. Like from really small things like I've had where sometimes I was like, hey, you know, maybe if you didn't feed a butterscotch candy to a Tory marmot, they might live longer. And they're like, oh my God, I never thought about that. It's like, oh, cool. Well, that's a win for everybody. Now you won't do that again. So anyway, the idea of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, what's behind the misuse or the flagrant disobedience? Like we said, fines aren't a great educational tool. That's a great point, Greg. So thanks for bringing it up.
On the other end of that, the care and passion we put into designing the trail is reflective of the user's experience as well. They see that, they know that. You know, speaking from experience, being at a nature center, having all the comments come in, pass and that virtual, you guys did last year. Like, one of the biggest comments that we hear all the time is, holy shit, those people are artists and they care what they do. Right, and that was like one of the things that people said, they didn't use that word. But the care and passion put into it is like the work itself. They can see that like written in tread with the rock. And that is a big part of the experience. Like, I'm walking on someone's like masterpiece, so I can feel that how they put into it. You know that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, like the getting at the craft element and how well constructed things are helps, again, bring people into being willing to fund it and to want to go seek it out, is that, hold on, I just totally lost my train of thought. I think we might be done, huh? Yeah, yeah. Did not. Oh, that gets at the, not just professionalism, but also trail work as a craft. You know, like
Yeah.
a stonemason or a journeyman of any number of different trades, that we do a lot for the industry in general when we are scientific and we're professional, but also when we bring joy and seeing from someone else's experience and craft into it, that becomes more points of contact for other people to see themselves caring about it. So that was a way better ending than I forgot what I was gonna say.
Thanks for your kind attention.
Housekeeping, thank you so much for your attention, today, we're back here tomorrow, start at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Mel's gonna be here in the morning talking about risk management, both as like an individual who works outdoors, and then how we can kind of translate that to our organization.